Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Annie. I work with Domestic Violence Services of Snohomish County, and I'm here today with April Provost from Ideal Option to talk to you about DV and substance use disorder. So would you like to tell us a bit about yourself, April?
Yes, thank you, Annie. So again, my name is April Provost. I work for Ideal Option as a community outreach coordinator. And that's just a fancy title for saying that I go out into the community to speak to people about medically assisted treatment services. We provide medications to help folks that may be struggling with drugs and or alcohol. So I get to go out and meet with a variety of people. I come from a place of lived experience with substance use as well as domestic violence. So I guess I'm really passionate about wanting to educate folks and destigmatize both sides of that and to let people know that recovery is possible.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So could you tell us a bit about how prevalent DV is in substance use disorder culture?
Absolutely. So, there's been a lot of case studies that I've researched more recently, and it seems to be that, it's a pretty high prevalence. One of the case studies cited at about 53 to 63% of intimate partnerships experience some level of violence. And sometimes that can go both ways, or sometimes it can be more prevalent as one person going one directionally. It seems to be a higher prevalence when there's polysubstance use, meaning that we're using more than one substance. In particular, if there is a depressant, such as an opiate or alcohol, in conjunction with a stimulant, such as cocaine or methamphetamine. But it is a highly prevalent in the whole culture of substance use disorder. It seems to be particularly prevalent within the more unsheltered population and people that are not permanently housed. But that's not to say that it doesn't happen across the board. I think that we all know that domestic violence can happen. It doesn't adhere to any socioeconomic or education level. It's really stems more from childhood traumas and generational curses, so to speak. There's a lot of, has to do with mental health and just a whole array of circumstances that lead somebody to go down that path. But it does seem to be extremely prevalent. I can speak from my personal story. I know that it was in my early childhood, there was not any domestic violence witnessed by myself. However, I did have a lot of it in the family history. Prior to my active addiction, it's not something I was in any of my social networks. I didn't know people who were abused. I didn't, it was something that was absolutely looked down upon and it was a horrific thing that happened to other people. Once I started misusing substances, which started with pain medication, that I eventually went on to misuse. And from there, it just kind of spiraled, led me to ruin a marriage, not have access to my child, led to homelessness, led to criminal behaviors, and led to partnerships with people that were extremely toxic. I remember being hit for the first time by a domestic partner, and the shock. I was more in shock that it happened to me than I was aware of the pain that had been inflicted. But it's one of those things where it was easy to become tolerant of it when you're in that culture. I witnessed it happening to other females and males around me. It just seemed to be a social norm within that subculture. And I guess the more tolerant I became of it, the more I really started to feel that that's what I deserved. And there were many times when I would actually instigate or provoke the behavior as a means of punishing myself. It had a lot to do with my self-worth. I felt that that was what I was deserving of because I was unable to get out of my cycle of substance use. I was unable to get clean for my son. I was unable to get clean to save my family or my marriage or my relationships. I was doing things that I shouldn't have been doing in order to sustain my active use. I was living in tents. It's just a despicable and dirty lifestyle. And so I became, it lowered my self-esteem and it lowered my self-worth. And so I wanted to punish myself. And that was one of the ways in which I would do that, is I think I subconsciously gravitated towards relationships where I could be punished by someone else. That way, I wasn't really punishing myself. It was a way to fool myself into thinking that I deserved it. And again, it was just so prevalent. I would say that most of the females in that social circle had experienced violence, either sexually, physically, or mentally, on a regular basis. It was openly done. So for someone to be beat up in a group of people, a male beating his girlfriend in a social setting was not uncommon, and it was appalling that people wouldn't step in. Everyone kind of just turned the blind eye and allowed it to continue to happen. And I think that was a particular point where I really had to face the fact that I had reached a low point in my life. There was a certain point in which I believe that, I thought about killing myself. I was at such a low and felt so undeserving of love or support that I thought killing myself would be a way out. It would be a way that, my son could collect Social Security and at least then I'd be financially supporting him. I had no value. Clearly that didn't happen. I did go on and continue on down that road, but it was a cycle of relationships that ultimately became violent. It just became the norm. And it went to, higher and higher levels of violence. The last relationship I ended up in, we had been together 2 years. The violence had been escalating. The fighting had been escalating. And we both got to a point where we realized that this was not the life we wanted to live. And we either needed to split up and go our separate ways and until we eventually died from this disease of addiction, or we needed to get some help, because we both realized that we needed to be better. We needed to do better. We needed to do something different and get a life back. And we both ended up going into treatment and getting some help for our substance use. And then we ended up also realizing that, it was so much deeper than that. It is one thing to stop using substances, is entirely another thing to be in recovery. And that means recovery from everything. It means recovery from trauma and recovery from the domestic violence, recovery from any kind of neglect, getting to the root causes of what pain, the pain that we were trying to cover with the substances. We needed to get to those root causes. We needed to do some really deep digging into all of it, and then begin to heal from that and completely change our behaviors. We needed to completely change our reactions to other people's behaviors and start working and living a life of true recovery. And in my case, it just so happened that, we were able to recover independently and together, and today are still together, which is really unusual. But it took a lot of work. And I think that, I've seen a lot of women that are in these domestic partnerships where they're being abused, and they don't know how to get out of it. Maybe it's a cultural reason that they're staying. Maybe it's a financial reason that they're staying. Maybe it's because they have children and they don't want to break up the family, or whatever the case is. They'll stay in these relationships, and they've got to do something to mask that pain, right? If leaving is not an option at that point, or for them, or they don't feel like leaving is, or they don't know how to start to heal themselves to where they can get out of a toxic relationship, they need to do something with that pain. So they'll start using substances to mask it, because it's the quickest way to end that pain in the moment. Then you start this series of this cycle of addiction. And now, instead of masking the pain or covering the pain, now you've just created a new avenue of pain. And so now here you are, still in a very toxic, unsafe relationship, and now you've developed an underlying substance use problem. And it's going to take that much more effort and that much more recovery to get out of it. So it's prevalent on both sides, whether it starts with the substance use or whether the substance use is used to mask the violence that's already there. It's just so prevalent in both sides. But finding the right avenues of recovery and having the right resources and having those contacts of people that you can reach out to get your basic needs met and allow you to get out of those environments and start to address the issues is what's really important. So for me, the first step was finding a way to stop using and finding a safe place to live. So some kind of sheltering where my basic needs are being met and I can quit using substances, so that I have the clarity of mind to then dig into my traumas and my healing and start working towards finding better behaviors, better responses, and finding my way out of those toxic traits. Annie, did you want to move to the next slide?
Oh, yeah, and I just wanted to also add that those individual choices you were talking about are what is absolutely key in this situation, where there was nothing that you could have done to force your partner to change. That wasn't a decision you made. That wasn't anything that you did in that moment. That was his journey. And
it was, yes, absolutely. It was, we both came to the conclusion, and it would just happen to be serendipitous that it was at the same time, but we both knew that we needed to change. We both knew that this was really unhealthy and that we were going to die if we continued down this path, whether it was hurting each other or just hurting ourselves with the substances. There were just very few options for us to have any kind of a tangible life, right? So those were decisions that we had to make for ourselves. They could not be made. One person can't make it and the other one says, oh, okay, I guess I'll go along with that and do it for you. That's not how it works. Your recovery paths have to be individual. You cannot, you may be able to walk the journey together side by side, but you're not going to be able to carry the other person or force the other person into it. That has to be an individual reaction and an individual true desire to change. It has to be an independent desire.
And I think for a lot of people in abusive relationships where there is substance use involved, they can be under that impression that it's up to them to change their partner, and that's something that's in their power. And if they can just do the right thing or say the right thing or make the right decisions, and that they can force that change upon their partner, whether that's by requiring them or saying that if they'll leave the relationship if they don't go to AA, if they don't do this, if they don't do this, these things that they're pressuring that other person to do, because that's not what that substance abuse isn't where the DV is coming from. And ultimately that survivor in that relationship, they're going to have to make a decision for their own safety. They're going to have to do what is best for them and let go of the hope that their partner is within their ability to fix, within their ability to change and take the right steps for their own safety. Because ultimately, as you said, that's what we're all responsible for our own journeys.
Absolutely. And it's also, important to note that the single best and actually the only thing that you can do that will make that may make any impression on that other person is get out of the situation, get clean, and start your recovery and show them that it's possible. Them seeing you be able to do it is like the only thing that you can do is being successful in your own life and getting away from that toxicity and recovering and healing yourself. It can shine a light back on them that, hey, they got out of this, they got clean, they did this, and I hope that instigates them to, or shows them that it's possible to do and to come out of, but they still are going to have to do that journey themselves and make that decision for themselves. It's nothing that you can do for them, but you can be that light to say, hey, I was able to quit using and I was able to get a life back and I'm successful and I'm thriving. And that maybe gives them the courage to start their own journey of recovery. But you can't do that recovery for them and you can't make them do it. And you certainly can't change their behaviors or their toxic traits.
Absolutely. And could you also speak a bit about, I think there's a lot of myths around drug use or substance use causing somebody who would otherwise never be violent to become violent, or causing someone who would otherwise not be controlling or abusive to become that way.
Right. So it's not an innate aspect to beat your significant other. I don't think, by nature, most of us want to be nurturing to our partner, right? We want to love their partner. Domestic violence, in my experience, generally is systemic from a learned behavior that they learned somewhere early on. So a lot of it is, again, generational. They saw it with their parents. They witnessed it somewhere. They experienced some form of trauma that flagged them to be more likely to become violent with a partner. The substance use can agitate it. It can exacerbate it, but it's not the reason that somebody hit somebody else. They've learned that, or they've developed that through some kind of trauma or past experience. It's not something that they're just going to be like, oh, I took a drug and now I want to hit somebody. It can make you more aggressive. It can make you more likely to be more engage more in conflict. But it's not generally going to be it's not going to be the reason that somebody hits somebody else. It exacerbates things that are already there.
Yeah, I think that's a big myth that goes around in our culture, is that drug use, alcohol use is what causes, though they're so often talked about as like, oh, well, he's a violent drunk, so those two, it's the drinking that's led to the violence. But there's so many people who are using substances who are not violent and who do not abuse their partners. And there's a lot of people who are abusive and who are very controlling and very violent who do not have a substance use disorder. And so
Absolutely. And I
yeah,
think that if you look back to those people that, when they say, oh, well, he's like that when he's drunk, I think if you really looked more closely at it, you would see characteristics of abuse, maybe not physical, but there's already red flags and warning signs of toxicity and abuse. And maybe it's, the alcohol is what pushes them over the edge and because it inhibits you. So it will allow you to unleash what's already there and take it to the next step. So I'd be willing to bet that there were warning signs, before before they drank, where they had those toxic traits already in there, maybe just not pushed over to the edge to the point where they strike. The alcohol and the drugs are not going to be what makes somebody more prone to be violent. Those things are already developing within them.
Absolutely. And I'm so like what you were talking about with sobriety, that stopping drug use or stopping alcohol use isn't enough. That's not going to be what changes that person. That's not what going to be that. No, it's not going to be what heals that trauma and what changes those behaviors.
Absolutely. Recovery is a journey. And I think that a lot of people have a misconception around, once they stop ingesting the drugs or the alcohol, that they're fixed. And that's not the case. That is not what a person being in recovery means. Recovery means exactly that. They're recovering. They're actually putting in the work to heal. So, and that means going back to, all of your, it's exploring what your toxic traits are, identifying them, changing your behaviors and your responses. It's so much more than just the cessation of the actual substance.
And I think the same goes for survivors who are in abusive relationships who are using substances, because it's not the addiction that is the cause of their problem. Their problem is that they are in a situation that feels hopeless. They're in a situation where they're being abused and whether they are being actively harmed, and that substance, as you said, is a form of pain management. And so if they get sober, if they stop using substances, then their situation hasn't changed. And
absolutely,
the things that led them to use haven't changed.
Absolutely. It's what it will do, hopefully, is it'll give you that clarity of mind to be able to recognize the behavior and make choices to get out of that behavior. So it's oftentimes it's much harder to leave the situation if you are under the control of a substance, because you're not thinking with the same mental acuity that you otherwise would be to leave the situation. So they kind of need to go hand in hand. Like, you're going to need to address them both. If you stop using substances but stay in that violent situation, chances are you're going to return to the substances and you're still in an unsafe environment and you're not getting to the trauma. If you quit, you're still in that situation, but then you enter into recovery and you identify that, hey, I need to get out of this situation. Hopefully that propels you and gives you the access to resources that you need to then leave that situation. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to, we really need to look back and heal our traumas and to fully recover and to not return to use and to not return to violent situations, and to be able to identify our partnerships and make sure that we form healthy relationships with others.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that we have you here today to not only share your story, but also to have this amazing insight.
Thank you. I love being here. This is a great passion of mine. It's not a portion of my story that I regularly share, but I think it's one that's really important to be shared, especially for folks that may be finding themselves in similar situations. I think that we need to kind of cast some light on that and make sure that it's being properly recognized and that we have resources available to help people mitigate that trauma from being in an abusive relationship, especially as they start their recovery journey. I think that it's really important to understand that they are going to need to go back and do some healing from being in that relationship so that they don't find themselves going right back into that same cycle.
So there are some, or to move on to the next part, is some risk factors for both substance use disorder and that somebody might end up in an abusive relationship or an abusive situation. So some of those could include family history. There's a family history of substance abuse, or if there's a family history of DV, even if it's not something that there was necessarily direct witnessing to from the person when they were growing up, but even if it was just in the household or a part of that family dynamic. And then, of course, exposure in childhood. If they directly witnessed violence, or if they directly witnessed substance abuse and it became a normal part of how they experienced adulthood or a family dynamic. Trauma as well.
I would say that the exposure in childhood plays heavily into the factors into both of them. I know that in so many cases, I mean, I can't tell you how many, give you a percentage, but I would say that, a vast many of them have this generational cycle. And they grew up where parents were alcoholics or parents were addicts of some kind. And they witnessed it firsthand between the parents. And it's just kind of gone down the family tree to where it just keeps getting perpetuated over and over again. And that is extremely prevalent, especially in our more rural communities. I found that that's tends to be, where they've had multi-generations living in the same area. And if you go back through, it was, this was learned behavior that's been going on for many generations.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time that it can be a really big risk factor, it's not a destiny. If somebody grows up in a house with substance use, or if someone grows up in a house with DV, that does not mean that they are stuck in that they're destined to use that. A lot of people are able to take those experiences and use them against what they want to experience. Say, I know what I don't want my family to be like. I know what I don't want my life to look like, and use that as fuel to make better choices or create a different life for themselves than the people in their family had.
Absolutely. And, so I know that what I saw in my childhood, I'm like, I am not going to repeat this. I'm going to do everything differently. But I didn't do anything to help myself to figure out how to make that happen, how to do things differently. And the more I tried to do the opposite of what I grew up with, the more like it I became. So I think that, people really exploring and finding, the best practices of how to break those cycles can be important as well. I didn't have any intention of becoming an addict like my parents were, but it was funny how I ended up, as much as I tried to go against that and to become something different, the more like them I became. So being able to recognize it and do that interior work and really be cognizant of ourselves and really introspective is also a super important component to it.
And like you were talking about with the work you're doing in breaking that stigma and breaking that shame, I think that's a huge part of us breaking a cycle, because so much of DV and so much of substance use is wrapped around in shame, and it's not something we talk about it. It's just something that should stay in our family, or something that it should just go quiet. When they see it in other families, that's that family's business. That's not our business. But in order for people to be educated, in order for people to have a real understanding about how to break that cycle, about what leads to substance use, about what the signs are that somebody might be an abusive person later in a relationship, or what the signs are that somebody might be becoming an abusive person. We need to have these conversations. We need to be open about it. We need to really, really break that stigma, which is so amazing now, this work that you're doing in the community and just how open you've been with everything.
Absolutely. You know, the longer that you keep something in the darkness, the faster it grows, right? When we start to shine light on things, it takes that power away. And I think that the biggest portion of healing on my part has been turning around and using my story and getting it out there. And it really did strip away a lot of that shame and guilt. So I would encourage anybody that, has the courage to do that and feels so inclined to absolutely stand up and share your stories and give other people hope that there is a way out.
Yeah, I guess kind of a funny story I have from my own childhood was when my mom got sober. She was an alcoholic and she was addicted to Xanax. She told everybody, and we would be in a grocery store and she would be like, someone would say, "Oh, you're buying an awful lot of Diet Coke." And she'd be like, "Yeah, I'm getting sober. It helps me." And I would be like, "Oh, Mom," I want to just disappear in those moments. But her ability to talk openly about it, to talk with people about it, people would ask her, "Where are you going?" Or like, "What are you doing tonight?" And she'd say, "I'm going to an AA meeting." Really, no matter how well she owned it, she owned it. She was open about it. She would talk about it with anybody and everybody, which again could be embarrassing, but I think she did a lot of work in helping people recognize that it was okay to seek treatment, that there wasn't going to an AA meeting, going to a meeting wasn't something to be embarrassed about. Going to a clinic to get something to help you come off of the substances you're on isn't something you should be hiding from people, and that when you're open about it, you can get support. There was so many times when she would be talking to someone she's known for years and tell them I'm getting sober. And they say, "Oh, you know what? I've actually been sober for 10 years. Let me help you through this process. Let me give you support." And that was something they didn't know about each other. And by not only being open, you're able to find other people to support you and have that support from other communities, but then you can become a supportive person in other lives. And like you said, really inspire people.
Absolutely. And, they have the saying in the 12-step program that your secrets keep you sick, right? So it's kind of, it strips the shame away if you don't hold the shame onto the shame yourself, right? That's the single best way that we're going to get that stigma to dissipate, is if we're ashamed of it and we don't want to admit to it and we don't want to talk about it. How are we going to expect others to be accepting of it if we aren't accepting of it ourselves? It's turned into one of my greatest assets. And I think that's how we're going to start to, break down that stigma.
Absolutely. So some other factors that might be going into, or some other risk factors could be trauma, having traumatic experiences and seeking out a relief from the pain that comes along with that. And as we know, a lot of DV relationships, a survivor might leave one and then go into another one immediately, because we know about that cycle that, oh, yep, I met this person and they are just incredible. They are obsessed with me. They're madly in love with me. They see all of these beautiful things about me and they always buying me gifts, and this love bombing that they give you where you just feel incredible. That to somebody who might not have come out of a DV relationship, or someone who had a lot of their needs met, their emotional needs met, that might be off-putting, that might be a bit of a red flag. But for somebody who is in need of that love, in need of that care, it can be so easy to accept it. And then as those signs come, those red flags start coming up, they can be easier to dismiss, because it's that love that you're getting is worth it. The love that you're getting is so much bigger of a deal than that time they screamed at you, or that time they hit you, even that time they threatened to kill you or put you in the hospital.
Absolutely. That craving, at the end of the day, it's just that craving of wanting to be wanted by somebody, especially if you are so polarized, or, for those of us that, it started with substance use first. I mean, I had decimated all of my other relationships. I had felt rejected from my former spouse. So to feel that, like, oh, I love you, you're wonderful, that all of the attention, all of the charm that they put on, I was so desperate for it that, yeah, it just drew me in hook, line, and sinker. And I think that that's, a huge factor in that, and within the drug community is like, I want to feel worthy of someone's love, and that's what they'll prey on.
Yeah. Another risk factor could be reliance on a person or a substance to meet needs. If somebody is experiencing pain, if somebody is experiencing something that anxiety, someone who has extreme anxiety, a lot of times a doctor will prescribe them Xanax or a benzodiazepine. If they're having extreme pain, they might be prescribed an opiate, and those are treatment options for that pain, but that can become a reliance. And as well as in relationships, somebody could need financial security, so they might turn to a relationship where there is that security. They might need emotional affection that they're not getting elsewhere, so they turn and they go to meet the needs that anybody has from a relationship, and that can escalate. That can turn into something that they weren't expecting, that they don't know how to handle.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've witnessed, predominantly females that, are embroiled in their active addiction. They are unhoused. They don't have anywhere to stay, and just having access to a shower and a warm bed and have those very basic fundamental needs met. It's amazing how much you'll tolerate in order to get those. And it's kind of a natural instinct that, okay, I have to do whatever I have to do to get this need met. I need sheltering, I need drugs, I need whatever the need is, whatever is driving them. They will tolerate whatever they need to in order to get that need met.
And another one could be pressure to continue using or to stay in a harmful relationship. The pressure that's put on us in our lives by others is a huge impact has a huge impact on the decisions we make and how we go about our lives. And so if there's a lot of peer pressure to use substances, or in DV, if there's pressure from your parents, your family, your friends, your religious organization to stay in a harmful relationship, then that can make it really hard to exit that. The people that you're surrounded by have their opinions, and their choices have a huge impact on you. And if other people in your life are continuing to use, or if other people in your life are in abusive relationships and they are saying that's just what a relationship looks like, this is just what love looks like, then that can be a really big barrier in leaving and in stopping substance use.
Absolutely. And as from the domestic violence standpoint, I mean, if you are in, you have cultural or religious factors where, leaving is not an option because of those, that religious or cultural belief, to walk away from that relationship may mean leaving everybody, and how polarizing and how fearful is that, to think, okay, I'm not only going to be leaving my partner and that stability in the home, but I'm also going to be leaving behind every other aspect of my life, my entire social network, my entire family, because they're all going to turn away from me for leaving, because it's not acceptable within this culture or within this religion. So I can see where, that would be a huge factor of like, okay, well, I'm not just going to lose the relationship or that stability of home. I'm going to lose absolutely everything in my life that I'm familiar with. And that's got to be absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely, so much. And that's where it comes in, having people without shame, people being able to talk about it and saying, I was in an abusive relationship, or I was in substance use culture. Like, I was this was what my life looked like, how your life looks like now. This is what I was experiencing, and I've come out of that, and it was terrifying and lonely and painful, but what's worth it on the other side. Like, we all know that leaving.
Absolutely. And, I know from the substance use, I hear it like, I mean, it is 90% of people, that's their biggest thing is that when they stop using substances and you kind of have to leave anyone who is leaving substances, you can't, continue to have the interaction with them. And people feel like they're abandoning their friends, and they feel like, okay, well, if I can't hang out with or spend time with anybody who uses, I don't know anyone who doesn't use anymore, right? I've either damaged beyond repair those relationships, or I've lost touch with them. And so I'm going to be so lonely. And then that loneliness leads to a depression. And then that depression causes, it's kind of the downward spiral. So that's why I say that just not, it's so much more than just not using the substances. You have to, have that support network on the other side. You have to, and sometimes it's hard as an adult having to relearn how to make friends, right? It's kind of like back when you, for those that had to switch schools when you were a kid, right? Like your whole world is turned upside down, and how hard that was to have to go to a new school and meet all new friends because your family moved. It's kind of like that. And then you're doing it as an adult, and you just feel kind of goofy and weird, like awkward, like I don't remember how to make friends when I don't have any already, right?
Yeah.
So that's often one of the biggest concerns for folks. And that's why those support groups and finding those activities is so important and integral to from both perspectives, because you're going to probably have to, find a new network of friends and support systems. And that can be daunting as for an adult starting over.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads us to the next portion of talking about resources. If somebody is ready to stop using substances, or if they're ready to leave an abusive relationship, or do both, what are some resources that they can use?
So Snohomish County, we are actually very fortunate. We have a lot of programs that can provide some wraparound service case management. We're kind of almost ahead of the curve. So we have embedded social workers with our local law enforcement, and that's available in pretty much every area of Snohomish County. And then there's ones in Skagit as well, and King, but especially if you're unhoused, you can reach out to those social workers, and they can provide you with all of your basic needs while walking you through the process of assessments or housing or treatment, emergent medical needs, all of that. So those are some wonderful resources. If you are already self-sustaining enough to where sheltering isn't an issue, there's a whole variety of places that you can go. So the community support programs like the Recovery Cafe, super wonderful places that can kind of get you connected with all the services that you might need. The 12-step programs, the AA, Narcotics Anonymous, there's Smart Recovery, there's Recovery Dharma, there's a whole plethora of those, and those you can definitely get plugged into. There's the Carnegie Resource Center in Everett that can provide you with access and links to all of those. Generally speaking, if somebody's substance use has gotten to the point where their life has become completely unmanageable, they're going to require a slightly higher level of care than just going to maybe some support groups, right? So maybe they're going to need some kind of intervention like a detox or an inpatient or outpatient treatment services, perhaps in particular, with the opiates and the alcohol, or benzodiazepines, or if their use is significant with cannabis or with, and then with the stimulants. Sometimes the medication assisted treatment option is a really great way for them to overcome that detox period, get them stabilized, and kind of help curtail the cravings for the substances. And that's what medically assisted treatment does. And there's kind of two different ways that you can go about that for opiates, but predominantly for everything else, Ideal Option is a medically assisted treatment clinic that can help with any of the substances. So there are treatment protocols and medications and comfort meds that can help walk you through that very beginning stage, and then for continuation of care can help with the cravings for as long as is needed. And you can kind of get that support from them. So it's a very evidence-based tool that helps more people than not get off of harmful substances. So it's a great starting point, and it's a place where you can also get linked in with other resources to manage whatever other levels of care that you have. So first step is obviously we want to stop using substances. Well, how do we do that? We can start with a medically assisted treatment program where you can go in, you can get some medications, you can get an assessment, and you can get linked into continuation of care services, whether that be inpatient, outpatient, and then different levels of care within outpatient, and then also navigated to places like the Recovery Cafe, or maybe it's housing. Maybe you need to have a higher accountability in your housing and you need clean and sober housing where you're around like-minded people, where there's a layer of accountability and, random drug testing, and that, there's meeting requirements, and there's just that higher level of care to help you on your recovery path. All of those things can be found through any of these agencies. So, which is wonderful. And then also through DVS, if you are in a critical or serious domestic violence situation that you need help getting out of, absolutely cannot recommend enough for you guys to contact the DVS. But and then we work closely with DVS, so they can do that warm handoff if substances is also an underlying issue or another predominant issue. They can help connect with the resources that are needed too.
Absolutely. And I do also want to emphasize that our shelter is a very low barrier shelter. So some people, like unhoused people, or some people who are fleeing domestic violence, will encounter situations where they have to be clean and they cannot be using drugs. They have to pass a drug test in order to stay at that shelter. So our shelter is a confidential shelter, and we serve people who are at imminent risk of being harmed by their partner. So we don't want to have that barrier. We don't want to say, yes, if you are an imminent risk, you can come to our shelter, but you have to be clean. You can't use it, and you have to immediately go cold turkey and stop using. So we just have, we don't have those expectations, those unfair expectations for people, although we still do have boundaries about what is acceptable, like not using in the shelter or around children. Then you can also contact the National DV Hotline. They're a really great resource if you're not living in Snohomish County. And there's also specialized DV programs as well, such as the Deaf Abused Women's Network, the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, and the Northwest Network of Bisexual, Trans, Lesbian, and Gay Survivors of Abuse.
Absolutely. And just as a side note, for Ideal Option, we are also extremely low barrier, and we do work on a harm reduction model. So if you start your treatment with us and you're still struggling, we're not going to just drop you. You're not going to say, oh, well, you can't pass a UA, so you're not going to be seen. There's also no wait times. So we can usually get you in, if not same day, within 24 hours. And we do accept most Medicaids. So we try and make it as easy and flawless as possible. We want to see you succeed, and our providers are going to work with you one-on-one to really devise a program based on what your needs are. So we have a variety of people that they just want to decrease their alcohol use. So there's medication and treatment protocols that can help with that, and in the more of a harm reduction model instead of an abstinence model.
So as we're approaching the end, going a bit long on time, but that's because we have so many awesome things to say here. But we'll just talk about how you can help a loved one and how you can be supportive to somebody in your life.
So absolutely, one of the most pivotal things, again, people feel like they're polarized and they feel very alone. So if you have a loved one, please stay in their lives. Don't cut them off completely if at all possible, unless it is absolutely harmful or toxic, too toxic for yourself. That's understandable. You do need to keep your own peace, but do your best to stay engaged in their lives. Let them know that they are loved, needed, and wanted, and that you can be supportive to them with some clear boundaries, right? So yes, I love you, and I will take you out for a meal and make sure that you get fed, or I will listen to you when you want to vent, whatever. However, I will not let you come into my home while you're using. I will not give you cash. Those are just some examples of it. With domestic violence, I am here and supportive of you, but I'm not going to condone you staying in this toxic relationship. So you're not going to come spend the night at my house to go return back the next day. Maybe that's what those boundaries look like for you. It's up to, I'm not the expert on the DV side, but definitely having those boundaries of what you will and will not tolerate, and just not cutting them off, making sure that they know that you are there when they're ready to make some positive change and impact. Be that support for them, that when they're ready to see the light, that they have a safe place that they can go, and that you're going to be there to help support them in that.
Absolutely. And so key here is for not only having empathy, but also understanding how difficult it is to leave a relationship or to stop using substances, and that relapse can and often does happen, and it can often be a part of the process. And that a lot of time, or the average time that somebody returns to their abuser is 7 times. It's not as simple as to just get up and walk out of the house. There are so many factors that are complicating. So it can be really, really, really frustrating to watch somebody in your life go in and go out of an abusive relationship. And it can, from an outside perspective, look like just leave, just walk away. What are you doing? But there's so many complicating factors in it. And, it's really not for us to judge as outside people, for us to make a decision of what is the best thing for someone, thinking if I were in their situation, what would I do? And assuming that's the right thing, because there's a lot of factors that we're missing there. So we absolutely advocate for being as supportive as possible. And that doesn't just mean emotional support, finding ways, maybe logistics, maybe they need some childcare when they go to a meeting, or they need childcare when they go meet with an advocate, or to a legal, like a court, being able to see what in their little things in their life you can do to support them on their journey to healing or recovery. And again, having strong boundaries. Don't put yourself in a position that's causing you emotional distress or where you're feeling taken advantage of. Know what you are, what you're not comfortable with. And even though it can be really hard and it can feel like you're causing that person harm by saying no, still you need to do what you have to do to protect your own safety and your own well-being.
Absolutely. And just know that, every time somebody starts the process, even if they fail, it's still, they've gained some knowledge base, and it's one step closer that they are to actually going into successful recovery from either perspective. So trying to be there, as frustrating as it can be, having lived that life and gone through it myself, and now being on the other side where I'm trying to help others come out of it, I even get frustrated sometimes. You just want to shake them and say, oh my gosh, why can't you just do this? And I really have to, remind myself that this is part of the process, and I'm going to love and help unconditionally. That doesn't mean that I don't have my own boundaries, and that, hey, you're not going to be calling me at 2:00 in the morning to get a ride from, whatever trap house you're in every single time, and then being manipulated into going here or there. And I'm not going to have you come stay at my home, but I'm going to, make sure I can get you somewhere safe, whatever that might look like for you. Just realizing that every time they reach out is a step closer that they're getting to ultimate recovery.
So we'll really quickly give a brief overview of the organizations we're with, and the services that we provide for the community, before ending with our contact information, and a big thank you to April as well.
Ideal option, medically assisted treatment clinics. So it is just like a regular doctor's office. You book an appointment, you come in, you're seen, you get a prescription sent to your pharmacy, and you get to go pick that up. So we help with getting through the detox process and comfort meds, as well as continuation of care for the cravings. And then we also have a sister company that can do assessments and some outpatient services.
And so at DVS, we are the main provider of services for survivors in Snohomish County, specifically of intimate partner violence. So we have that confidential shelter I talked about, serving people who are in immediate risk of being harmed. We also have legal advocates who can help walk someone through the process of getting a protection order, or an getting a protection order, as well as a few other services, and accompanying them to court for emotional support. We also do offer community advocacy, such as our address confidentiality program, and elder abuse advocacy, and our prevention education outreach department too, which is us who go help educate the community and get rid of some of that stigma around DV. So if you'd
like to get an appointment with Ideal Option, you can call the number that's listed here, the 877-522-1275, or you can visit us online and book an appointment online at idealoption.com. We currently have 4 clinics in Snohomish County: Montlake Terrace, Everett, Marysville, and Arlington, and we will soon have one opening in Monroe.
And then for DVS, if you have any questions about prevention or education, please feel free to email me at annie@dvs-snoco.org, or if you need immediate support or questions about DV in general, not related to prevention, you can call 425-252-2873. So thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate your presence, and a huge thank you to April for coming here to share your story and your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you. I loved being here. Thank you for allowing me to share my story and shine some light for people. Thank you.